Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Cuero. I'm really excited to be working with you today. Everybody ready to talk about leadership this morning?
Yes.
So we're going to talk about this thing called the Leadership Challenge, and this is a workshop we're going to go through to kind of take us through the essence of what this Leadership Challenge book's about. And people will ask, why are we into this model in particular with so many books out about leadership? We really like the Leadership Challenge model because it's been around for a long time. Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner, the authors of the book, started their research in about 1985. Their first book came out in 1987, and the research they've done is pretty rigorous. They've done 30 years of collecting data. Millions of people are using this model, lots of organizations, not-for-profits, schools, colleges. So there's a lot of data and validation of what's in this model. So I'd like everybody to kind of think of this concept we're going to be talking about all day and think about your definition of leadership. And I invite, if you're watching this video now, I'd like you to kind of hit pause and think about some notes about when you think about leadership, your role as a leader, what pops into your mind? What do you see as your definition of leadership and your role of I am a leader? What do you think about this statement? Only 3 things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. So one of the thought leaders in this management organizational development field is Peter Drucker, and he said this many years ago, but he followed up that statement with this one: everything else requires leadership. So I'll ask you, when you think about your work environment, your schools, your libraries, think about the friction, confusion, and underperformance happening all around you. Also follow up with a question of where's the lack of leadership? Who is not leading in this environment? And oftentimes we want to point up and we want to say, it's the administrators. It's if these lead people could kind of take charge of things, we wouldn't have so much of this friction, confusion, and underperformance. But the reality is leadership's everybody's business. And if we all kind of embrace this concept of leadership, we can reduce this. We'll never eliminate all the friction, confusion, and underperformance in our workplace, but we can certainly reduce it. And creating a culture of leadership is where that kind of thing can happen, where everybody feels responsible for the leadership in the environment. So here's our definition of leadership: the art of mobilizing others to want to struggle for shared aspirations. Every one of the people you lead and try to influence is different, and that's what makes the art about this. Not only that, but you are different, and your approach is, trying to be an authentic leader and trying to lead in a way that's appropriate for you is really kind of what we're trying to discover in these kinds of workshops. So it's an art. And so I'm not going to give you a scientific formula. What I'm going to give you is 5 essential practices that if you get more attuned to them, you're going to be more effective with the people you work with. I want you to think now, when a new leader comes into your environment, what are some essential questions you want to get answered by that leader? And lots of research has been done. Jim and Barry have pooled a lot of the information. They've asked probably millions of people at this point this question. And here are the 3 frequently asked questions. These are the essential things that everybody wants to know about their new leader. First is, who are you? Right? People want to know who this person is. So things like personality, what are your pet peeves, what motivates you, how do you like to carry out your day, are you extroverted, introverted? Those kinds of things can tell us a lot about the leader. Your values. They also want to know, where are we headed? Where are you going to take us? People want their leader to take them someplace. And where are we headed is an important question. And then finally, there's this question of, what are you going to do? I always add the words "to me" at this too, because we all have a selfish interest. Is this leader going to improve my life, my work style, or is this going to be someone who maybe is a little annoying to me? Maybe they're someone who likes to have lots of meetings and you don't like to have meetings, or maybe they're someone who likes to shut themselves in their office and send lots of emails and you would rather interact. So what are you going to do? How are you going to lead? What's your style? So these are those essential questions, and I'll ask you, do you know the answer to these questions for your leaders? And some of you are leaders. Do the people who work with you know the answers to these questions for you? So that's an important part of being a leader. So the next thing I want to kind of get as we're studying this idea of leadership is I want you to think about the leaders who have influenced you. And hopefully some of those names pop into your head. I invite folks who are watching this video to pause your recording and think about, who are those leaders that you hold in the most esteem, the exemplars of leadership that you would like to emulate as you become a leader. It's good to have those most admired leaders because those are the people that will really influence you in the future. Also good to think about those least admired leaders and think about what is the source of why you didn't admire them and why you choose to not be like them. Most of leadership is learned on the job, watching leadership. And so if you do some analysis of people you've worked with that inspired you or maybe demoralized you, you'll get some insights about the kind of leaders you're looking for. So take some time and think about that and reflect on it. The most admired leaders in our lives, it's hard to get into that club, isn't it? When you think about those people who have really had a positive influence on you. So I'm going to ask you, what does it take for you to become a most admired leader? You know, if someone was to take this course with me, you know, what would it take for them to maybe have you pop into their head as one of those most admired leaders? So again, Jim and Barry have done some work on this and studied it, and what they find is for younger folks, those most admired leaders are usually closer to home, right? So many of you teachers and coaches, you might not even realize that you're the most admired leaders of someone. And you know, of my 5, 2 were teachers/coaches for me in my high school years. Very influential. As we get older, though, the people in our professional lives, so you see over 30 there, we're looking at more of the business and people we find in our workplace. But the other thing to think about is, who are your least admired leaders? Who are those people that you would choose to never work with again? Because ultimately, that's the test of an effective leader, right? Do people want to work with you again? Would they choose to work with you in the future? And I would argue that those least admired leaders are those people you would avoid at all costs. You'd never want to encounter again. The heart of the study that Jim and Barry did to come up with these 5 practices was this essential question. So it's really important that everybody takes some time, so pause your video and think about, when have I been at my best as a leader? What kinds of things was I doing? What were the key attributes I had? What was the environment I was in? Because when you think about yourself as you're at your best, it helps you as you move forward, because you want to be able to replicate that and be more effective in the future. So think about yourself at your personal best. You're going to be able to share your story, so think about the story you have, and then think about, if you ask other people, when are you at your best as a leader? You'll find some common themes come through as you start talking to people, that when they're at their best as leaders, they're doing core things. Eventually, you're going to see that these 5 practices are really the essence of when people are at their best as leaders. So if you think about personal best leadership experience, your PBLE, you add a couple letters to that, and you get your PEBBLE. And I've been working with this. I actually came up with this idea years ago, and I asked my students to not only tell their story, but I actually get some pebbles. By the way, the beaches in Rhode Island are some of the best sources of pebbles out there. And I bring some pebbles to them, and they take a Sharpie marker and write some descriptor on them. So what you see in this picture, one of the gentlemen with the tie is actually Barry Posner. So he's the author of this book. He loved what we were doing in the United States Coast Guard with this model, and he actually came out and shared some of his information with us. And I asked him to do a pebble, and what was interesting about Barry, his pebble went back to a time when he was a student leader at UCLA, and he had to step up as a student leader because there was race riots going on in LA in the 60s. And he stepped up and kind of rallied his student body, and he told a great story about how that influenced him, and and he let me keep that pebble, so it's kind of special. So lots of people have done pebbles. The last group of educators I work with did these set of pebbles, and you can see they're much more creative. And obviously people are adding color to them. And what Yanti and I did, which was pretty neat, was we had people get up in front of the class last year and share their pebble. So they described what they wrote and the symbology on it, and told us about what it meant to them. And my hope is, after I took this picture of them, they all took them back and they're sitting on their desks or on the mantle or someplace as a reminder of when they were at their best as leaders. Because the next challenge I'm going to have at the end of this workshop is for you to think about, what is your next pebble going to be? When are you going to have that next personal best leadership experience? Because that's really the goal of this workshop, to reflect on your past when you were effective, but also think about the future. So there's some fundamentals to the book, to the workshop that we're going to go through. So we already talked about this first one. Leadership is everybody's business, right? We want leaders at all levels, right? Because that friction, confusion, and underperformance is not going to get fixed just by that senior person. Leadership is a relationship, right? So we should always be thinking about the foundations of great relationships. Like Mark mentioned, trust is the foundation of great leadership. Leadership development is self-development, and I love this next one. The best leaders are the best learners. The corollary to that, and kind of the sad part of that, is the rich get richer. So people who care about relationships, care about having influence, care about being effective leaders, often tune it in and get much better, while those folks who just don't pay attention to it get further and further behind. So great for you to do that, and think of ways you can influence those people who might not care much about this subject to kind of come into it. We have to find more enjoyable ways to come into this leadership studying. It's not an event, right? This is an event, but we wanted you to reflect on your past and think about what you're going to do in the future, and it's an ongoing process, and it takes practice, right? These are not the 5 leadership concepts, the 5 leadership steps. These are deliberately the 5 leadership practices. Because here's the problem in leadership. Everything we talk about, everything we've already talked about today, what we're going to talk about the rest of the day, is common sense. right? You're all going to say, oh yeah, of course, that makes sense, you're supposed to do it. You're supposed to listen, you're supposed to trust, you're supposed to do all these things. It's not common practice. And that's why there's so many problems in the workplace, right? The common sense concepts that we all know just don't get practiced enough. And that's why I think it's a great word they chose, the leadership practices, right? And there's behaviors associated with each of these practices, so you can get into more of a practice of doing this. And so Dave's favorite word there, leadership is an aspiration and a choice, right? So we're aspiring to greater places with leadership, and that's another one of the fundamentals. So that's kind of the foundation of this model. These are the practices. So again, Jim and Barry studied everybody's story about when they were at their best as leaders, and from those stories and examples, they synthesized it to these 5 practices. So great leaders model the way, they inspire a shared vision, they challenge the process, they enable others, and they encourage the heart. And if you want to memorize this, and I encourage you to do that, just think of those first words in each of these, right? You got to model, inspire, challenge, enable, and encourage. That's the 5 words to remind you when you're at your best as a leader. It is also a way to remind you when you think, wow, leadership's not happening in my work environment right now. What is that thing that we're in a deficit of, right? A lot of folks will tell me it's the encourage the heart piece, right? We're just not building our relationships and appreciating each other enough. Okay, so now that we call this orienteering. When we get oriented to what these 5 practices are, as well as what leadership is really about, we're kind of finishing this idea of the conceptual ideas of leadership. The next thing is to get into actual practices of what does exemplary leadership looks like. So we've got that covered, and now we're going to start moving into each practice one at a time, starting with model the way.